Welcome back to Paul's Tech News. We're already a week into May, and that means there's less than a month to go until the veritable PC hardware orgy that is Computex, which promises to bring with it a multitude of new launches and product announcements. We've stopped attending the orgy part of Computex, though. It just didn't feel right ethically. Also, thermal paste does not make good lubricant. More to the point though, if you've been feeling like there's been a lack of big tech announcements in the past month or two, you're totally right. But all that pent-up hardware has been building and swelling and will burst forth very soon. The anticipation is palpable, but it is still the calm before the storm, so for now you'll have to make do with a bit of a tease and this week's stories about AMD Radeon GPU sales tanking, more melting RTX 4090 power cables, and EK water blocks still existing. Such audacity. It's time for the tech news.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by Thermaltake's EX series fans, featuring magnetic force connectors that can daisy chain fans together to simplify installation and cable management. CT120EX fans feature solid all-around performance and a touch of tasteful RGB lighting. The SwaFan EX series revolutionized case fans by adding swappable fan blades, and the ToughFan EX Pro series sports best-in-class high static pressure for use with radiators and an aggressive all-black design. And all of them feature larger magnetic force connectors for easy wiring. For more on the EX series fans from Thermaltake, click the sponsor link in the video description. AMD published their Q1 2024 earnings report on Tuesday, and despite an optimistic outlook due to the burgeoning AI front, their gaming numbers were quite dismal. AMD's gaming division revenue fell to $922 million. That's 48% down versus Q1 2023 and 33% down compared to last quarter. AMD says it's because there has been a decrease in semi-custom revenue and lower AMD Radeon GPU sales, which refers to both console and desktop hardware, and it's likely that console interest is at a low point right now since the PS5 and Xbox Series X have been out for 4 years, and many anticipate a mid-cycle refresh coming soon. Radeon GPUs, meanwhile, have struggled to compete versus Nvidia's offerings, despite typically costing less. If recent Steam hardware surveys are any indication, the public sentiment seems to be that AMD Radeon video cards simply aren't discounted enough to make up for their relatively poor ray tracing performance versus Nvidia, and the perceived advantages of DLSS and other supplemental features in the Nvidia software suite. They are not optimistic in the near future either. AMD EVP and CFO Jean Hu said on the earnings call that we actually think the second half will be lower than the first half. That's basically how we're looking at this year for the gaming business. It's unfortunate because AMD's Radeon GPU competition is very much needed to keep Nvidia from raising their prices even further, but for now it seems like we'll be sticking with the status quo and optimistically looking to 2025, when hopefully AMD's Radeon team will have a better answer for PC gamers on the hardware side. That, or they could just do some steep price cuts to their existing cards. Oh, and also on that call, AMD confirmed that they are already sampling Zen 5 CPUs, and both the Turin EPYC and Strix Ryzen families of CPUs are planned to debut in the second half of 2024. Or maybe AMD's Radeon team can just wait for all the Nvidia GPUs to melt. We lost another one this week, an RTX 4090 that is, to a melted power connector. And to be clear, this has happened almost exclusively to RTX 4090s due to their high power draw, and overall the melted connector rate is quite low, or so we're told. But it just won't go away completely, and the latest report comes from the Korean Quasar Zone forums with some unsettling details, like the fact that the connector melted at both ends this time, the PSU side and the GPU side, and according to the owner, the card was set to run at 75% of its power limit, a step that some concerned 4090 owners have taken in an attempt to avoid this issue. So, rest in peace, yet another 4090, an MSI GeForce RTX 4090 Supreme X24G specifically, as well as the FSP Hydro power supply that died along with it. And no longer rest in peace, I suppose, you remaining RTX 4090 owners out there who thought you could rest easy since you circumvented the melting power cable problem by applying a power limit. Wouldn't it be nice if AMD had a video card that could compete with the RTX 4090 so we could direct people to buy that instead? Nope, we can't have nice things as PC gaming enthusiasts. At the highest levels of our hobby, we get to pay $2,000 plus for a video card and then cross our fingers that the power plug won't become a smoldering, bubbling mess of melted plastic and toxic fumes just by using it as directed. Too bad there's no other way to power a video card though. Speaking of a smoldering, bubbling mess, EK water blocks. You'd think that that would be all that's left of the company after the double shelling they took from Gamers Nexus investigative reporting over the past 2 weeks, with more than an hour and a half of time over 2 videos dedicated to dissecting EKWB's recent spate of missed vendor payments and apparent rampant mismanagement. The second video, posted about a week ago, and went into even more depth, covering EK's legal threats sent to former employees, lack of workplace safety in their warehouses, and a sprawling org chart that seems intentionally obfuscatory in nature, like an overly complex custom loop that doubles back on itself to avoid paying taxes it owes. Add in some accusations of racism that seem to have been documented via internal chat logs, and you have a recipe for a company that is in deep, deep trouble. So let us gaze upon their destruction with somber contemplation, for EK is no more. Actually, scratch that, it seems EK still exists. You can even still buy stuff from them. I was led to believe that this business had imploded Steve from Gamers Nexus, and from my understanding, it is difficult to keep a website running or ship orders due to the effects of an implosion. But perhaps I'm being a bit too hasty. It's probably one of those slow-moving implosions that takes a while to completely collapse in upon itself to the point of singularity. But when that does happen, hopefully Gamers Nexus will hire a drone to get footage of it so we can all watch. Speaking of things we can all watch, check out these tech briefs. Razer is finally being held to account for the pandemic-era release of the Zephyr RGB face mask, a product that was all about the flashy RGB, with much less emphasis on meeting the N95 grade filtration standards that it was advertised with. The United States FTC is proposing a $1,171,254.33 settlement for Razer, supposedly matching the profit they made selling the Zephyr due to the misleading claims that it could function as an N95 respirator. Razer still says that they didn't do anything wrong, and they'll go back to making misleading claims that all the RGB on their products makes it worth the sticker price. Speaking of overpriced plastic things, the Rabbit R1 debuted this week, but now that it is actually subject to reviews, the vibe is decidedly different than when it was the darling of CES back in January. It's supposed to be an AI assistant, but as many, including myself, asked back in January, what is it doing that you couldn't just do with your phone? Turns out the answer is nothing, since the Rabbit R1 is basically just an Android open source project device that runs an Android app. And that app can even be loaded onto a smartphone, completely negating the point of having the $200 device. As Ars Technica puts it, the Rabbit R1 is a completely non-viable device that doesn't solve any real problems, has terrible battery life, and is missing big chunks of core functionality. Sounds like you just saved $200. Speaking of missing core functionality, Intel LGA 1700 CPUs have been under fire lately for being unstable, and a bit more reporting has trickled in to confirm what many of us suspected. Thanks to Intel's lack of specific baseline rules for motherboard vendors when it comes to default settings, CPUs often run with overly aggressive power limits with inadvisably high voltage applied, and over time this has caused more and more problems for end users. Even settings that Intel claims are in spec can cause these issues, and it's clear that the push to eke out more performance to compete with AMD has compromised their ability to ship a baseline functional product and make the overclocking part optional. Surely they will fix all these problems when their next platform, LGA 1851, launches later this year though. Right guys? Finally, I've never played HellDivers 2, but I do spend a fair amount of time on the internet, which is why I am keenly aware that it has become quite the popular game since it launched back in February. Except not anymore. It sucks now because the devs announced Thursday that PC gamers using Steam will have to link to a PlayStation Network account going forward. It was optional at first, but will be mandatory as of June 4th. Developers at Arrowhead Games have been fighting the negative feedback ever since the announcement went up, with more than 20,000 negative reviews posting within about 24 hours. And with good reason, too. It's not just due to the principle of the thing, or the annoyance, or the fact that this move is almost certainly being pushed down by higher-ups at Sony, but also remember that PlayStation Network accounts are not available globally, so there are a lot of people who bought HellDivers 2 who don't live in the 69 countries where PSN works, like China, and those people will simply no longer be able to play. Thanks, Sony. But there you have it, guys. Tech news for the weekend. If you liked it, click that like button or leave me a comment down below. While you're down there, all the articles I talked about today are linked in the video's description if you're interested, and you can also check out my store at paulshardware.net for high-quality merchandise, t-shirts, hoodies, beer sets, and more. Subscribing to my channel is always a good call too. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next week.